Obligation 10. Put country first. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution, the final amendment of the Bill of Rights, is something of a catch-all. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. It follows on the 9 previous amendments, which are for the most part specific in the rights they are protecting. The 10th implies that there are additional rights the federal government cannot take away from the states and the people, even though they may not be specified. I say this because the 9 previous obligations put forward in this book, be informed, get involved, stay open to compromise, remain civil, reject violence, value norms, promote the common good, respect government service, and support the teaching of civics, lead to a 10th that provides guidance for all other behaviors not already specified. I speak of the obligation to put the country and American democracy before party and person. This obligation is a thread that helps bind the fabric of this society and is an essential element of patriotism. Putting democracy in the country founded on it first is the only way to preserve and, better yet, improve the United States of America that, for any and all of its shortcomings and flaws, is still the most successful political experiment in human history and the one with the greatest potential. As he did so often, Abraham Lincoln said it best: "We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth." What is required for this to happen more than anything else is an abundance of character, what in earlier times was known as virtue. James Madison, a founding father and the country's 4th president, was explicit on its centrality to the democratic project. To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people is a chimerical idea. Some 2 centuries later, the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush, made a similar point. The public interest depends on private character, on integrity and tolerance toward others, and the rule of conscience in our own lives. Self-government relies in the end on the governing of the self. Virtue or character cannot be mandated or legislated. It can be encouraged on the basis that it is right and moral and ethical. But it can also be encouraged on practical cost-benefit or instrumental grounds, in that over time individuals and groups will be better off if they go about their lives keeping in mind broader and longer-term considerations. The case of Merrick Garland is relevant here. Barack Obama nominated Garland, a respected and qualified Court of Appeals judge, to the Supreme Court in March 2016, 2 months into Obama's 8th and final year as president. The Republican-controlled Senate refused to take up, much less approve, the nomination, even though several nominees to the court had been confirmed in the final year of presidential terms in the course of American history. Adding insult to injury was the Republican action 4 years later, when Republicans controlled both the White House and the Senate, in nominating and confirming Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court just 6 weeks before the election that Donald Trump lost. The danger is that these episodes will reinforce the already widely held view, which gained ground in 2000 as a result of the Supreme Court's ruling in the disputed Florida recount of the Bush-Gore vote, that the country's highest court is motivated more by political than legal considerations. The risk is that future court opinions will not be respected or accepted by many Americans. It is advisable that court decisions be guided by the principles of stare decisis, that things decided should stay decided unless there is a very good reason for change, and judicial restraint. If it is not necessary to decide more to dispose of a case, then it is necessary not to decide more. The Supreme Court violated both principles when it ruled in June 2022 to overturn Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision that recognized a woman's right, derived from the 14th Amendment, to have an abortion under defined circumstances. There was no valid reason justifying the opinion, while those bringing the case were not requesting that Roe be overturned, but amended to narrow the period in which abortions could be legally carried out. What changed was that there was a new majority on the court, brought about by the questionable political means just described that sought to alter policy, in this instance by granting state governments vast power to regulate abortions. That this ruling came on the heels of another Supreme Court decision that limited the ability of states to regulate access to guns only added to the perception that politics more than the law was driving court actions. Already there are calls to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court to create a new majority. The problem is that such court packing by Democrats, in retaliation for Republican hypocrisy in the Senate, might provoke additional efforts to alter the court's composition or independence that would further diminish faith in the court and the legitimacy of its rulings. One could even imagine state legislatures mimicking what happened in the run-up to the Civil War and voting to nullify or invalidate the application of Supreme Court decisions in highly controversial areas such as gun control or abortion rights. A stable democracy requires institutions that enjoy widespread acceptance, and a stable American democracy requires a Supreme Court that enjoys sufficient standing so that its opinions, even on the most controversial issues, are broadly accepted as legitimate and final. Such standing has been seriously jeopardized. When I was teaching in the 1980s at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government, such calculations came under the heading of thinking institutionally. The idea was to encourage students to think beyond the immediate issue at hand and short-term considerations, and instead to think long-term, about how whatever institution was involved would benefit over time from certain behaviors, even if the individual did not support or benefit from the specific decision at hand. Thinking institutionally has another dimension. Institutions are desirable because they encourage and lock in sought-after behaviors. Implicit in this notion is that doing the right thing, acting in a manner consistent with the obligations put forward in this book, will not just happen by itself. What gave rise to conservatism in the classic sense is that human nature required certain guardrails if our better angels were to prevail. Early on in the book, the point was made that democracy does not inevitably materialize, nor is it guaranteed to survive. A democratic society made up of individuals prepared to live by the obligations put forward here is far more likely to institutionalize democracy. It is noteworthy that the concept of thinking institutionally was associated with the school named for John F. Kennedy, as the idea of doing the right thing, even at personal cost, formed the core of his book, Profiles in Courage. First published in 1956, the book, attributed to then Senator Kennedy, but written in large part by his principal speechwriter, Theodore Sorensen, tells the stories of 8 U.S. senators who did the unpopular thing by standing up for compromise or principle when doing so put their careers at substantial risk. As Kennedy described it, some were courageous in their unyielding devotion to absolute principles, others were damned for advocating compromise. In many ways, he employs courage as a synonym for both virtue and character. Particularly relevant for this book is what Kennedy goes on to say. I am persuaded after long study of the record that the national interest, rather than private or political gain, furnished the basic motivation for each of the 8 senators he chose to write about. His desire to win or maintain a reputation for integrity and courage was stronger than his desire to maintain his office. If there were to be a new edition of Kennedy's book, there would be a strong argument for a chapter on Representative Liz Cheney for risking her political future by what she said and did in the aftermath of January 6, 2021. Sometimes it is easier to explain a point by highlighting its opposite. Here I would note the July 25, 2019 phone call between then President of the United States, Donald Trump, and Volodymyr Zelensky, the President of Ukraine. The latter asked for increased military aid, which Trump made conditional on Zelensky's launching an investigation of Joe Biden and his son that could prove politically useful for Trump. Trump later described the conversation as perfect, but in reality, this placing of personal political interests before the country's national security was anything but. Another way to think about what might be described as political character is suggested by the phrase loyal opposition. Both words are essential. Let's begin with opposition. Democracy requires entities that are not members of the party controlling a branch of government, or, in the legislative branch, that are in the minority, that question it, hold it to account, and offer policy alternatives. This is what opposition is all about. It is unavoidable and necessary and constructive by keeping the majority honest and by creating the grounds for intelligent compromise. But equally important is the other word in the phrase, loyal. The party in opposition has a higher loyalty to the law and to the success of the country. Opposition must be grounded in policy and principle, not politics, if the country is to succeed and democracy endure. To oppose, to block, when what is being put forward is preferable to any available alternative, is simply inconsistent with what is required of democracy. In return, the party in power is not meant to equate opposition with disloyalty. Members of the party in power, like those of the party out of power, must place the interests of the country before their own. Politicians are unlikely to do so absent external pressure. It is far more likely that they will act appropriately if such behavior is rewarded, and lesser behavior penalized. That is where the rest of us come in.
Enlightening. I really recommend this book. It's called The Bill of Obligations. It's gonna focus. There we go. It talks about 10 habits of good citizens. I am an American citizen. I became one last year after living here for 25 years. And I'm learning every day to be a good citizen. Anyway, thank you. Take care.